Although the popular healthcare press is describing the lawsuit filed on December 23rd of 24 by Aetna Health against Radiology Partners as a battle over out-of-network No Surprises Act billing and even of private equity involvement in healthcare, medical group leaders should pay even more attention to the allegations involving pass-through billing, an issue that many groups ignore at their own peril. It's important to note that at this point, the lawsuit filed by Aetna and the facts and purported conclusions made by it in its complaint are just allegations. The case is at its earliest stage. There's been no determination by the court of any sort of liability. Pass-through billing is an industry term that describes billing by one entity for services or items that were actually provided by a different entity. In the context of physician services, issues of pass-through billing most often arise when services actually performed by physicians employed by or contracted to one medical group, Group A, are billed by a different medical group, Group B, under Group B's provider agreement with one or more payers. The object is to obtain the higher reimbursement associated with Group B's contracted rates. The allegations against Radiology Partners, in simplest terms, are that Radiology Partners, an aggregator of independent radiology groups, together with one of its affiliated groups in Florida, which is also named as a defendant, that entity is Morey, Bean, and Brooks, engaged in a fraudulent scheme to bill services performed by radiologists actually employed by other Florida-based, legally independent Radiology Partners affiliated groups, as if those services were performed through MBB, the single entity that they were using for billing. Aetna alleges a two-part, two-direction scheme. It claims that, to begin with, Radiology Partners identified MBB as having the most lucrative in-network contracts with commercial payers in Florida, including Aetna, and began using MBB's name and TIN, taxpayer ID, to bill for services performed by all of its affiliated Florida radiology groups. Those other affiliated radiology groups had their own separate contracts with Aetna. Aetna claims that by misrepresenting the affiliation of the radiologists, Radiology Partners secured higher reimbursements under MBB's more favorable in-network agreement. Aetna then claims that after it realized the increase in the number of claims filed by MBB and terminated the in-network relationship with MBB, Radiology Partners pivoted to a second phase of the alleged scheme. It continued to bill under MBB's name and taxpayer ID for services performed by the physicians employed by other Florida-based affiliated groups, but this time as out-of-network services. Aetna alleges that this was done to game the No Surprises Act's independent dispute resolution process, with Radiology Partners causing MBB to file tens of thousands of arbitrations and collecting far more than the in-network rates Aetna had in place with the physicians' actual employers being other Radiology Partners affiliated groups. Let's look at pass-through billing of services potentially by you. At the heart of Aetna's allegations is the claim that services actually provided by physicians employed by or contracted to one medical group controlled by Radiology Partners were billed by a different medical group, in this case MBB, under the different group's provider agreement, and later pursuant to its out-of-network status. In ways both similar and dissimilar to Aetna's alleged facts, medical groups of all types and sizes can and have, purposefully or inadvertently, wandered into the same dangerous pass-through territory in regard to physicians and other providers, for example, CRNAs or nurse practitioners' services, in addition to another subset outside the scope of this discussion, non-service items such as diagnostic tests. One common example involves an out-of-network group purportedly subcontracting its employed physicians to a better reimbursed in-network group through which services are supposedly rendered and billed. Another common example involves a form of rate arbitrage involving two in-network groups. Better reimbursed Alpha Group works a deal with lower reimbursed Omega Group to bill Omega's provider services as if they work for Alpha. Alpha retains a piece, the arbitrage profit, for the favor. So what's wrong with pass-through billing? Why should you care? The simple answer is that you likely want to keep your medical license. You don't want to be liable for civil damages, including significant punitive damages for fraud, and you probably want to avoid potential criminal prosecution. I've yet to see a payer agreement that doesn't limit the individuals whose services may be billed pursuant to its terms to those providers who are members of the contracted group. How members are defined varies, but it's nearly always clear that the definition does not include physicians and other providers employed by another group. A violation triggers breach of contract claims, fraud claims, and on the criminal side, depending on how claims were transmitted, mail fraud, wire fraud, and other state and federal violations. Depending on the circumstances, the arrangement might also violate state or federal anti-kickback laws, criminal false claims laws, and prohibitions on fee splitting. Pass-through billing can also implicate state medical ethics and unprofessional conduct requirements leading to medical board discipline. Here's a couple of immediately actionable takeaways for you. Before even considering any arrangement in which your group bills for the services of another group's members, obtain legal advice to interpret the limitations of all impacted payer agreements. The same advice applies in reverse in the case in which members of your group are going to have their services billed through another group's taxpayer ID number. There are, depending upon the particular arrangement, potential end runs around contractual pass-through billing prohibitions, but they are highly fact-specific and very technical. Depending upon your appetite for risk, they can and should be explored. For more information, contact me.